Hi, this is Kathi Quinn with Floriani. Floriani is a division of R&K Distributing, and I want to welcome you to this week's Project of the Week. Now, this is week 3 of Preferences, or part 3. So we're going to finish up what we're going to talk about in the Preferences tonight. Now, the Preferences is the rules of your program. It's rules that you can set so your program behaves the way you want it to. So let's go into Tools. We're going to go down to Preferences, and we're going to go to Environment. Now, we finished this last week, except I couldn't tell you what automatically select created paths was, so I'm going to show you. I'm going to leave it deselected, and I'm going to come in here, and I'm going to come up, and I'll just grab a circle. Now, I'm going to draw a circle holding down my left mouse key and dragging. Notice the circle is staying on my toolbar, on my, whatever we call this thing, my cursor. So I can continue to draw as many circles as I want. Now I can go back and select them and say, you're going to be a run stitch, you're going to be a decorative, you're going to be a applique. I'm just clicking my one-click wonders at the bottom. You're going to be Auto-Baste. So I created all my shapes and then went back and selected them and told them what I want them to be, which is very handy if you're going to do multiple shapes, circles, squares, multiple single lines. If I wanted to draw 3 or 4 single lines before I said make me a run stitch, I can do it by deselecting that option. Let's go back to Preferences. Let's go back to Environment. Now let's say automatically select created paths. Okay. So now when I do that same thing, the minute I draw one and let go, it's selected. It's finished. It's no longer on my cursor. So now I do whatever I'm going to do with that shape. So you can see if you're going to do one and finish it and pick, this is the way to go. But if you have multiple lines to draw, multiple circles, multiple of anything, deselect that so you can get them all done, and then you can just go through very carefully, because now if I wanted to do another one, I'd have to go back up, select it, draw it. I want this one to be an applique. Then I'd have to go up, select it, draw it. This one's going to be decorative. So you get the point that you can either draw them first and then go through and select them and parcel them out to what you want, or you can do them one at a time. But each time you'd go back up and get the tool. So it's a pretty handy little thing. So, our preference. So let's go get a new piece of paper. And we're going to come back to Tools, and we're going to come back to Preferences. And we're going to look at our grid. I'm going to take this snap to anchors off. Now let's just look this over real quick. Now this says I've got my grid at a 1 inch by 1 inch. This is the default for every time I open a page. So I've got 1 inch and 1 inch. I've got my grid lines in gray. I have my grid major in purple. So this is saying every 10 lines. So if these are at 1 inch, every 10 inches, it's going to have a major line. If this was at ½ inch, every 5 inches, I would have a major line. So every 5 inches, I've got a major line. So it's every 10 grid lines, you get another one. So let's go back to Tools and Preferences. Now this, when I tell you this, anytime I open a new page, it's going to fall under that. But let's come here and right mouse click and go to Grid Settings. Now I can change this to 1/4 inch in here and say OK. Now I'm going to open a new piece of paper, and you can see in this case that held very nicely for me. It's what I set it to. But we're going to go to grid set. We're going to go to preferences because I need to show you there's a few preferences that whatever you pick in here will always stay on the page when you open a new page. I'm going to put this back at 1/2 inch. Now we can also come in here and under grid, we can see these grid lines as solid. We can see them as dashed or dots. I prefer dashed lines. But let's say I wanted solid lines and I wanted them in another color. Now I'm going to say okay. Now it's 1/2 inch, they're solid lines, and blue are my 1/2 inch. My purple are still at every 10 grid lines. I'm going to come back up to Tools and Preferences. Go back to Grid. Now I like the gray and I liked having dashed lines. All personal preference. Now let's look at these right here. Let me set that. Let's come back and let's look at these. Now, what are these options for? Snap to grid. I like snap to grid. Snap to grid means if I come in here and I start clicking, if I'm not quite on the grid, it doesn't matter, it's going to find it. I'm not quite on the grid, it's going to find it. It's going to find it. So you can see I'm not really at it, but it jumps up and it grabs the grid line. This is a wonderful feature when you're trying to get nice straight lines, nice crisp corners. This is a great feature. It's not a great feature if you're trying to do something else and it keeps snapping to a grid line. So if it starts doing that and you forgot, that's your frustration. Now, if I come up here and I say take that off, okay, so I did that with my right click here. So now I can click wherever I want, all right? And that's where my inline ends are going to be. But let me open a new piece of paper. Now let's come here and let's try again. Oh, so this one went ahead and obeyed. It changed it in my actual preferences. Okay, so we got that. This snap to grid was off. So if I go to my Tools, Preferences, it turned it off for me. But now let's go to Snap to Anchors. Again, I love this feature, and I'll show you why. Let me get a square here. I'm going to go ahead and get me a square and draw it. Now this, you notice I put on Snap to Anchors. If I go to draw something else, let me turn this square into a fill. Let me grab this square and I'm just going to turn it into a fill here. Okay, so I've got a fill going. Now with my Snap to Anchors, I'm going to select my artwork tool. Do you notice that my control points come up at the corners? Everywhere there was a control point, it's showing up, because that allows me to snap to that anchor. Let me get rid of my magnifying glass. So now if I'm going to draw a line and I'm going to click, I'm going to go ahead and do this, and I go, it's going, no matter where I'm clicking, just anywhere near, it's actually grabbing that anchor line. So now it's snap to anchors. So now there it is, and it's exactly where I had my previous anchors down. And now I could say turn this into a border, and I know it grabbed exactly at those lines. And that's really a nice thing when you're doing, let's do a shape that's not so easy. Let's go ahead and come in here and let's grab our complex fill. So now I have a complex fill here. If I want to come in, let's grab this and let's change the color on this so you're not going to be able to see them. There we go. So now I'm going to go ahead and grab my artwork. And see, there's all my anchors. So again, I'm going to change my color here for you. I'm going to get close and it's going to snap to that anchor. How cool is this? I don't even have to be right on it for it to snap to an anchor. It makes it really easy and nice for me if I snap to those anchors. Then when I right mouse click and I've got that line around there, I can turn it into whatever I want because it did that nice artwork line around it and it snapped to all my anchors. So that's a wonderful feature. But now let's get a new piece of paper. Let's go ahead and draw a square. And let's fill it. And let's go ahead and get our pen. Snap to anchors. Now let's turn it off here. Let me snap to anchors is off. And let's get a new piece of paper. I'm going to turn that into the fill. And now I'm going to get this. And notice snap to anchors stayed on. That preference stays on even if we've turned it off here. Snap to anchors is one that will stay on as a preference. You can't get rid of it until you go into you can get rid of it for this page, but anytime you open a new page, snap to anchor is going to still be there for you. So go into the grid and you'll have to turn it off if you want it off all the time here. Now, of course, on our grid settings, we can come in here and we can do snap to grid, guidelines, anchors. We can do all that in here. Just know that when you go from page to page to page, the snap to anchors will be whatever it is in your preferences. Okay, so now let's look at one last thing here tonight. We're going to get a design up. I'm just going to pull this as one of our new August designs. Now we have another tab in here. We've got two tabs, I'm sorry, that we're going to look at. We're going to look at Auto-Baste. Now Auto-Baste is a really nice little feature. First of all, you need to decide how far away, how long do I want my basting stitches. I usually do 5 or 6. I never go above that because then sometimes the needle thread has trouble catching with the bobbin thread before it moves across. So I'm usually a 5 or a 6er. Then, how close do you want it to the edge of your design? It depends on the thickness of your fabric. If you've got a heavy fabric, you're going to kind of make that a little farther away so it doesn't get bunched up and pushed like a towel. But if it's a cotton, you might want it maybe 1 millimeter, 2 millimeters away. We also can add crosshairs to our baste. So I'm going to say OK here. I'm going to select my design, and right here is my Auto-Baste icon. See this right here? Now it has followed my rules. It's 2 millimeters away. My stitch, of course, we already know how long it is because we told it to be, how far it to be. Now, the thing you can't see, let me select everything and scooch this over just a bit because it's on those purple major lines. You can't see there's my crosshairs. So it does put in crosshairs as well. So those are features you can use on or off. So you have a nice Auto-Baste, and notice it came to the top of our list. Now, the one last thing we want to look at in preferences is we're going to look at text. I'm just going to bring in a text right here. Let me just stick something here. Okay. I'm going to come into my preferences, and I'm going to go to the word fonts. Now, all of these fonts in the middle are enabled. They're all fonts in our font list. Now, I might have some fonts that are my favorites. Let me go and say I like Verona, and I'm going to make that a favorite. And I'm going to make West Wind a favorite. And I'm going to say I don't like let's just say Rhapsody. So I'm going to disable Rhapsody. Okay, so I've put these two in my favorites. Now what that's done for me, and I'm gonna have to pull my screen down because of the way this is with my Camtasia on. I'm gonna come in here and I'm gonna say, drop this down, and if you notice, if I go all the way up, Verona and Westwind move to the top of my list. So I can put all my favorites right at the top of the font so I don't have to come down. Now I took out Rhapsody. So you notice Rhapsody is no longer in here because I disabled Rhapsody. I put the other two as favorites, so they moved all the way up to the top. So I don't have to dig for them when I want them. I'm going to bring this back up. And so I can go back to Preferences, Tools, Preferences, and Fonts. And I could say I want to enable Rhapsody. Please put it back. And I could go ahead and enable these, and they'll go back into the list exactly where they belong. So I hope you've enjoyed or learned something with our preferences that we've talked about for the last three. So this will be our preferences part 3. I look forward to seeing you again next week. Have a wonderful week, and I look forward to seeing you again.